Welcome to the Kickstart podcast, where we highlight the stories of how professionals kickstarted and navigated their successful careers. My name is Preston, and on this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting someone who has an impressive career both in product design and co-founding multiple different companies. Today, he's the head of product and design at Underline, a company that is building an intelligent infrastructure for every community. Coty, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Perfect. I feel the same way. I think a great way to start, Coty, is by asking you, for those that just don't know who you are, might be unfamiliar with your background, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'd say I definitely have come to design in a weird way. I think a lot of designers and product people do because there's not a lot of good sort of educational pathways and other things. So very generalist background, computer science background, but also an art background. And so those two kind of trajectories have just led me into all kinds of different stuff, whether it's healthcare, robotics, sports tech, biometric stuff. I made bobbleheads for a while, which was insane. It was the bobblehead story is actually a really interesting one because we also had a clearance for government work because the owner was a steamboat captain and also owned a GIS business. It was a crazy bunch of stuff, but anyway, we made bobbleheads for the government and all kinds of stupid things with that situation. So very, very all over the place, but I think a lot of my career has been an early stage startup. So a lot of innovating new stuff, not a lot of businesses to look around at and kind of see where that path forward is. You get enough of that, you just get some methods on approaching problems. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
it is. Yeah. And thank you so much for the high level summary. And a lot of things come to mind. The first thing I kind of want to take a couple of steps back and ask you, you mentioned that you have a background in art and CS. Now that CS for the audience is computer science. That to me is very unique because typically people go and get a CS degree very intentionally, and then of course leverage that to a successful CS related or software engineering career. You decide to have that background and also continue the design trajectory. So what came first? Was it the engineering? Was it the art? Did you always want to kind of be a designer? What about software engineering? Did you ever give that a serious think as well?
Yeah, I think that certainly as a kid and stuff, I was always the IT person in schools and things like that. And I honestly, at the time, I didn't think that while I was always interested in art and things, I didn't actually think there was a career path for it. So, it was something that I disincentivized from more of a professional kind of aspiration, but more of something as a general interest or a hobby. So much of my kind of primary schooling and other things were more in science and engineering and other types of things there. And I really kind of shirked the art sides of things. But graphic design and other types of things are in that digital space. There's a lot of collisions to it. And there was a lot of general affinity and maybe aptitude in that territory. And so it just kept kind of coming together. I grew up in an era where the web was starting to get wild, and being a part of that, experimenting, playing, seeing these things come alive, it was just so engrossing that you couldn't really escape it if you tried. So it kind of made this little explosion all over. The education side was really unfortunate though, because as I was in college doing the computer science route, I was also doing digital design and those types of things. So it's very hard to build an education around like drawing classes and then, advanced math. That most schools don't have a convergence, and I'm a terrible student regardless. And so it was one of those things where I really wanted to just build my own curriculum for those types of things, but I could just never make it work. So it was one of those things that I kind of just like got out of schooling and tried to run in my own direction, much to the horror of my family and everyone else. So yeah.
Well, you stumbled into an industry where having a CS degree at the very least can only help you. It can't certainly hurt you, right, Coty? And did you ever get to a point where you were actually able to code as well? I know a lot of product designers today, a lot of companies who are hiring product designers, they think it's a significant plus or an advantage of if the designers can code to a certain extent, especially on the front end, right? So JavaScript frameworks or languages, are you fluent or pretty comfortable in that? Or did you also dibble dabble in some server side backend as well, really kind of giving you a really robust, holistic background in education?
Yeah, no, I grew up in kind of script land, and working with a lot of the web technologies that were emerging, PHP, HTML, those types of things. I ran most of the websites and e-commerce stuff, building modules and plugins and all these things. JavaScript stuff, I still do stuff in processing and some of the generative frameworks. I've done some C# for game engine development. I've done a fair amount of SQL on a daily basis, which isn't quite a programming language. Maybe it's a defensive argument, but I've worked as a front-end engineer. I've run front-end programs for businesses that were looking to start treating it more seriously, bringing a lot of that to bear. So I've had a lot of prototyping and actual development experience. Can't hold a candle to my developers that actually do it day in and day out, but certainly familiar with all the concepts and have done a lot of on-hand stuff.
Got to give credit where credit's due, Coty. There are some in our industry that would call a designer that has the aptitude in business, design, and development, the triple threat. So you kind of check off all the boxes. Very, very cool there. Now, I just have to ask you just one more question before we continue. What are your thoughts on product designers entering the market today without a traditional design background? So in other words, a lot of designers, more experienced designers, followed similar trajectory to yourself, where they got somehow started in graphic, marketing, some sort of visual design, and then they kind of worked their way up to more digital, and then they went from digital design, web design, responsive to more native apps, right? But then now you're seeing, thanks to online certifications, boot camps, a lot of different programs out there where people go from completely irrelevant or just different backgrounds, and then now they call themselves a product designer with 1 year of experience, 2 years of experience. For example, if you're hiring for a product designer for your own team, would you think one is better than the other? There's no right or wrong answers. Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think because of my approach to education and other types of things, I probably have a slightly more, say, flexible or forgiving lens on it. The things I'm generally looking at from candidates are more about, gumption. There are a lot of just, personal characteristics that create an intellectual curiosity, or it's kind of a dedication to craft. It's a dedication to outcomes or value or ethics. Those are the types of things that I think are actually foundational to create the pathways that need to actually develop the things that change the world. And so, seeing projects and other things, really just seeing interest and seeing action attached to that interest is more important than anything to me. There's certainly the approaches to things, people having that intellectual curiosity and that drive to do something, that leads to people starting to wander down paths to understand psychology a little bit more, or understand, all right, how do I know this or that? I'm going to look at the data that leads to this. These are the types of individuals that, regardless of the background, they're approaching a problem, an unknown space. A lot of education says this is the way things are done, but and that's very important. First principles and other types of things, to me, isn't throwing the slate away. It's having a really strong background in understanding what has been done, and then why it was done, and then saying, all right, in the current contemporary context of this, I'm going to use this as a baseline for this, but I'm going to still go in a different path, or an educated pathway to doing it. I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. So, I think those are the main things, is just it's how you think about problems. It's how you have a drive to solve problems. It's how you have a drive to make sure that the decisions that you're making are in fact quantifiable, or that they're doing what they are outside of your own perception. So boot camps and other types of things, again, it's a newer field. There isn't good, strong pathways to this stuff unless you're coming out of a D school or something like that. I can't take a bias against someone who wasn't just born in a specific city coming to it. You have to take a look at the opportunities that they may have had and how did they deal with it, or how did they have more of an outsized kind of impact with the things that they were given. And especially in early stage, that's a really, really critical sort of piece to it. It's not necessarily as much in larger organizations where you can kind of slip in and you've got a lot of buffer zone. I tend to find more senior candidates for the types of work that we do just because of the kind of innovative nature of what we're doing, and the hurdles and challenges often require a really deft hand in those types of things. But if I can find a candidate that has all those other boxes ticked and really has the drive and curiosity and the humility to approach these big problems, then 100%, I'm sold on them.
I love it. Super helpful. And that just makes me think of one more. So how, from a founder, from a hiring manager's point of view, how important or critical is it having a really strong portfolio to get an interview request, right? And if people who are listening are the audience, a lot of them are within tech industry or very tech, just passionate about technology in general, who hopefully maybe one day aspire to work at startups like yourself or companies like Underline, for instance. What would maybe be an advice or two that you can kind of share with designers to help them make their portfolios more desirable or more robust?
So it's a really interesting question. I think there's a short answer, and it's that portfolios really matter. And then the other side of it is that portfolios aren't everything. And especially depending on the type of experience or where you're entering, with a certain level of seniority that you're at, I'm going to expect different things from those candidates. So for folks that are entering the field, it's always nice to see projects that have real world applications. A lot of the boot camps and other types of things, they tend to be more theoretical, problem sets, but it also shows that they can do the work, at least in that. They can go through a process for it, but it doesn't necessarily demonstrate that they can challenge a process or understand the kind of underlying factors that you have derived that process. So for junior candidates or folks in kind of coming into the career, I would both want to see that they have the ability to do some of the tactical pieces, but I would challenge them specifically on those other things to make sure that they've actually pushed against the boundaries and understood why they're doing something versus just following kind of that process. And so, again, that's going to be like, there's an aptitude in there. For mid-level or senior kind of designers, product people, whatever, there's a body of work. And so you actually start to have a history of what you've done with the opportunities that you've been given. And certainly for me, again, not everyone has the agency to completely control those situations or understand what, every single factor to dial into it. So I really, really appreciate portfolios that paint the context of those scenarios. Like, what were your restrictions? To me, design is all about restrictions. It's all about navigating within restriction. That is, to me, the defining quality of what design actually is. Art is expression, design is intention. And so when I can understand who did you have available, what resources, what time scales, what information, what, who helped you, who hindered you, in those contexts, what were the team size, communication, like getting a better idea of that environment and context, and then ultimately what came out of it, and knowing that you were tracking, certain pieces of that craft or how the output was effective, on the other side of that. If you can paint that story and show me that narrative and tie it to what actually happened, that is the strongest kind of portfolio that I could come across, because it's very easy to put together a very polished narrative on something and get kind of distracted by the smooth the smoothness of that, but you know, I want to see the rawness of it. Like I want to see the trade-offs. I want to see how you navigated challenges truly.
Isn't fundamentally that's what UX is, right? Being able
Yeah.
to just grassroots talking to the users, and then from there creating all these hypotheses, and then creating rough wireframes, prototyping, not just the final deliverable, right? I know a lot of product designers just focus on that, but you got to show that process, that narrative, that story. In addition to that, that for someone like you, like, okay, I can understand, I can follow his or her thought process.
100%. And that truly is what it is. That people are messy. This is the confluence of technology and people and the messiness of that. So, you know, nothing is prescripted. Even the well-defined kind of scientific process derivative that we go through, you know, that you expect everyone coming into the field to kind of know. It doesn't mean you use every single step all the time for no reason. Like you have to understand why you're doing things and use it to solve really unstructured problem sets. And honestly, very illogical, kind of messy human processes.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, we talked about you getting your start in product design. You mentioned that early in your career, you've always been interested in startups, and that's kind of how your career started. And you've just had a wonderful, illustrious career so far, working at a lot of different types of companies. At what point did it go from, you know, IC, tactical product designer Coty, to now entrepreneur, business owning Coty? Like, what do you remember what your first business is? I know you started multiple from way back when to Underline, but if you can maybe touch upon just a high level, like your entrepreneurial journey, how that started, what really inspired you, that would be really great to learn.
Well, it it probably started in like grade school technically, but I was up to all kinds of shenanigans at that point. Like, so you know, I came up in the mid 90s, and one of the things that happened was colored pencils and like Pokemon cards and all this other stuff. Everyone wanted earrings for a while, you know. I ended up actually finding a way to take spiral ring notebooks and cut them into metal clasps, and then you could pinch them onto your ear for a fake earring. And I think I was in like second grade or whatever. I made $50 in a week, and then you know the health person shut that down so that you know sharp metal wasn't attached to anybody's body. But generally, I think it's. I'm not sure if it is much intention as it was. I'm probably unemployable in in actually structured environments. So you know, I'm not quite sure it's something that just kept happening. Like every time I put myself into a really structured environment, I was often very frustrated with not having the agency to kind of determine my outcomes. And it's not, again, like a lot of people, that's a very privileged position to be in, to either throw caution to the wind and know that there are really bad outcomes if you lose on that, or to have the resources to float yourself through those situations. So, you know, when folks ask like, is that a good pathway or not? I can't tell them if it is or isn't. But I think that was where I kind of came to it, is I continued to want to do fun things, interesting things, kind of push the envelope on stuff. And traditional environments don't give you a lot of space to do those types of things. So you just keep coming back to it. And, you know, when they crash, burn, succeed, or you know, peter out or whatever, you then have that kind of time delay between it until something else is interesting and start moving in this direction. You identify the problems, and you hope that you can make a business out of it. So it's really just that, like, it's a need, it's almost a drive to make sure that the things that you're doing are progressing something in some way, that you're delivering something new, that you're doing something interesting or beneficial. And that drive, kind of like everything else, has to come in line with that. Like that's the main impetus, the rest kind of falls in place. And again, that's bad advice. If you, that's my advice, but simultaneously terrible advice. You know, it's a lot of people just aren't animated by these types of things. They shouldn't necessarily be. It just happens that I have been.
So I guess another way to ask is the older companies that you started were a lot of them, if not all of them, venture backed. Like, how did you even get inspired by the idea?
Yeah.
Where maybe some of your early co-founders, now your current co-founders, or maybe early employees, now part of the founding team at Underline. How did the evolution happen?
I've done everything. It's been my own little small businesses. It's been bootstrap ventures. It's been consulting and service kind of stuff, and into venture and everything else. So again, a lot of it was coming up in a Midwestern city, in Kansas City. There's just not a lot of ecosystem around early stage funding. There's more now than there ever was. But, you know, 10 years ago, you know, you don't have the types of capital engines that can drive, you know, new businesses and things. So you end up learning to bootstrap and dealing with, you know, angel and seed sort of, or the classic kind of friends and family. I've never been able to do that, but I hear a lot of people do it that way for sure. And ultimately, through several ventures in that way, it's very hand to mouth. And so I started looking outside of the region and other things to move into other ecosystems for that. So the most recent stuff, Underline, is certainly venture backed, and it's a wonderful host of different investors that we have. Some of them were carried over from some previous ventures as well. So one previous to that was San Francisco-based company called Neighborly, which was dealing a lot in municipal bond finance and just trying to find ways to democratize the investment in community infrastructure, which ended up exploding in a spectacular kind of fashion. But, you know, a lot of my current coworkers and colleagues came out of that, out of that situation, and was maybe the founding body of what Underline was. And a lot of our investors really believed in the plan that we wanted to execute for the infrastructure play around actual internet access in that transition. So I've been very lucky in that way, but a lot of mission-based stuff, again, just trying to find ways to, if you're going to use the time that you have to work, you know, 8, 10, 12 hours a day or whatever it is, right? Like, it needs to be worth it. It needs to be something that is substantive to things. So love partners that are also in the same kind of mindset as you are on that.
What I love about your background is that not only did you start multiple companies, but they're all completely different. It's very easy to be confined to one industry, right? Like, you start one fintech, and then you start another fintech. But to you, it's like all different types, and they're not all SaaS. Some of them are consulting. Like, you've dibble dabbled in everything, even to the bubble bar and earrings back in the day. So I think what I find fascinating before we get into Underline is that you unintentionally set yourself up, I think, in the best way possible for a successful founding career in tech. You had a background, you're educated in not only design, but also development, which we all know if you want to be a founder in any tech company, having a technical background is key, is critical, especially with the early team or the founders. And then you not only have experience working in a lot of different sizes of companies as an IC tactical design, but you also started so many. So like, putting all these together, it's almost like the perfect storm. Before we get into Underline, when you got inspired with the idea of Underline, for instance, like, as you get older, do you find yourself with getting like founding or founder fatigue, or like you get excited by the idea, but after starting so many companies, the work needed to actually execute on that idea and to scale a team? Or is the idea, I think, and I might have just answered my own question, but I think, please tell me if I'm wrong, what I gathered from what you said earlier is finding a problem that has a tremendous mission or purpose that in and of itself would just be encompassing, and anything else that follows, you're like, I'm all in, like, let's do it.
Yeah, it's kind of that, it's trying to find these big problems for stuff. I would say so. A lot of early stage stuff, of course, is a 0 to 1 problem, and just the nature of what you're doing often requires a lot more vision and kind of salesmanship, if you will, of concepts or ideas before you can actually bring those ambitions to bear with the appropriate capital and structure. So there's always a little bit of a dance in trying to refine what that vision is, but also trying to find a market fit for the investment of that. And even to find the right partners that after you work with, they will continue to help you. They want to see that thing successful rather than just have something else on, you know, a portfolio. So that's always a bit of a dance as well, trying to find the right partners for these problems. But yeah, it's just a natural curve. You start out very broad and then you start figuring out what works or doesn't work. But I find that mission-based companies, especially truly honest ones, you know, it's very easy to put on a front for this stuff as a marketing sort of gesture. But, you know, you tend to attract people who are very smart and that they tend to care about these problems. And you can really use that as a way to collect really interesting levels of talent and people together to solve these problems. It's a really, really good magnet, if you will, or maybe like a confluence of folks that want to take those skills and experience and passion and translate that into something that is more rare, which is to have a business that's doing something kind of good in a sea of more maybe transactional kind of capital machines. So and I don't think they're exclusive. Just because you're doing something that is very good doesn't mean that it can't be financially successful. But striking that balance and making sure that you have the right people to keep certain things in check, and that those, you know, those trade-offs, you know, matter, or making sure that you stay on the right side of stuff is also really, really important. So you got to find the people that have bought into it. And there's nothing more animating than a mission-based kind of company looking to do something to in that territory.
Speaking of mission-based, I think that's a perfect segue to Underline. So one more time, would you be able to show the audience what does Underline do in the simplest way possible? And just how were you and your co-founders inspired? Did you guys start cold turkey together? I know before you were, I believe, at Neighborly, another tech company. So how did the early days look like?
Every company starts in different ways, but let me go to what we're about and what we're up to. So I think on the most basic level, we're trying to use fiber optic networks across communities to connect people to the internet. That's like the easy one, I guess. But if you peel back some of the layers a little bit more, it's really more about creating operating systems on top of these communities to position them for what the future will hold. So pandemic and all these other types of events that we've had in recent times have really highlighted a lot of gaps in the current issue of society, or the current zeitgeist of society moment. But we're also looking to all these other technologies that are starting to come to bear, and realizing that our infrastructure is not ready for it. And it's certainly not going to be a good place to cultivate those types of things. So by building an operating system on here, having a fiber plant it's rated for 50 or 75 years, right? This it's glass. There's no interference from, like you do in copper. You can continue to upgrade the different ends so the technology can keep growing, but the pipe is still the speed of light, and then try to find really interesting ways to build software on top of that to maintain it and bring other providers onto it, and other ways to kind of build this infrastructure as a smart infrastructure is kind of unique and interesting. So in summary, it's called an open access network, and you can kind of see Underline as a bit of a utility structure in there. We've strongly believed that when you rip a road up, you should only have to do it once. And so being able to then bring providers into that, and they can operate on that pipe, means that you're gonna have more choice, more competition. Smaller providers can actually enter that space. They don't even have to necessarily be in the market to do that. They don't have to have the capital to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build this stuff out. and your road construction, your congestion is lowered. The city has access to that, where they would normally have to, they would either have laws at a state or a federal level that would actually keep them from building that infrastructure, like legally with the lobbying and other types of things that exist. If you want to build an industrial IoT that's both secure and can deliver, sensor telemetry, or to fight all these new different environmental, issues that are coming up for communities, like water and fire, wildfire, and all these other types of things. Like, you need to have a fabric underneath your city in order to build the right sensors and telemetry to combat this stuff. So yeah.
What does it look like without your technology? You said there are significant gaps. So like, if you said, having an underlying technology to connect a lot of these things so a community can operate a lot more efficiently or optimize in certain ways, like without Underline's technology, like how are things operating today? And what are these gaps that you're referring to?
Yeah, so if you take a look at the way that America does infrastructure in the telecommunications space, you have to take a look at the history of how it came about and the current sort of markets that it operates within. So any of the incumbents are largely going to be entertainment kind of companies. It's not crazy that Comcast also owns NBC, and it's also not crazy that your download pipe is much larger than your upload pipe, because a lot of what we've built in this infrastructure is currently made to just consume. But for us, we think that's a bit of a travesty. People should be able to create more sensor telemetry, and other things should also be able to go in both directions to support this stuff. It's not just about eyes on screens. It's about contributing also to the whole of this, and then allowing other mechanisms, machines, sensors, or whatever to also do that. So when you ask, what does it look like today? It's consumers exclusively. Like, it's for like entertainment and other types of things. So if you are going to say, okay, will a Comcast or something that's really just trying to prop up eyes on screens, are they going to solve our climate change problems? They're completely different incentives. And the cohort that really owns the majority of this infrastructure today is really dialed into that first concern and not that latter concern. So when we're recasting this, it's about the technology has become cheaper. A couple global events have happened that kind of pin a bit more of a target on the problems. The funding ecosystem and other types of things are starting to wake up to these opportunities. These all provide different advantages and generally different ways of thinking. And by being able to create Underline in this moment, the timing is fantastic. But you're actually able to compete and build new things to that latter concern, which is building robust and vibrant communities, not just having pipes to deliver content. And so that it's a completely different way you build a business. It's a completely different way you structure the conversation. It's a completely different engine of operation. So yeah, if you can leave it up to just the incumbents, you will continue getting the same old. You have to recast it in the appropriate lens.
Wow. So can you just elaborate one more time for the audience? Like, how would access to this sort of technology help a community with things like utilities and climate change to energy? Like, if just the kind of simple examples, like how would that work, just so people can really just truly understand?
Okay, so if you're a local utility in a community, you have to typically bond out for large sums of capital. You have to show up at Wells Fargo and kind of do a deal or whatever, it goes out to a vote, you got to deal with a bunch of these things. And that's if you're even legally able to do it. So there's a massive amount of just like upfront requirement for a community to even bring this stuff to bear. And then after they bring it to bear, they also have to operate it, manage it, and they have all the constraints of managing, of governing, with an additional requirement of kind of technological progress and other types of things that is often a friction point for that. So if I'm a local utility and I want to have information on all the water pipes in my community, all these water pipe, every day, massive millions and millions of gallons of water are just like dumped into the ground because locates didn't identify where these things were, or a couple communities have realized that their water is poisoning them, those types of things. Like a lot of our infrastructure came out of the 20s, 30s, those types of things in the New Deal, and they're getting old. They're getting hundreds of years, 100 years old plus. Some of them are wooden pipes, like that initially gave people a bunch of cholera. But some cities are still operating with some of those crazy pipes. So if you're that local utility and you want to monitor the health of your water system, or your electricity system, or your environmental considerations, air quality, have smart traffic lights and more intentional ways of reducing congestion or moving people or transit, light rail, any of these types of things, they all feed on data. And so, and then when you're taking a look at like wildfire and other types of things, there are plenty of sensors that you can build into these communities or run waterways or, all kinds of different things, but they're all enabled by smart, intelligent telemetry, both monitoring and making decisions in certain conditions. So if you don't have the ability to have those giant pipes, and if you don't have a way to also have secure pipes to that, that's a national security problem. There's still state actors trying to get at this stuff. They're trying to take down power grids and other types of things. You have to have kind of secure closed loops to do that. So it's all the above, but those are a few of the fiber itself is very important, but then creating the operational capacity in software to plug new things into it as an SDK of sorts at a community level is the other bit of that. And so we do both. We build it, and then we build the software on top of it to enable it.
The fact that you do both, it's quite an operation. It's a very huge kudos to you and the team. And then I'm curious, how easy is it to get buy-in from communities when you approach them? I think the great thing about your company is you already have a couple of live case studies that are happening right now.
Yeah.
So like what is that process like? And is it easier than you thought? Do you get a lot more pushback because of these, regulations and red tapes that exist today?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And every community is going to be different. So we tend to take a qualitative and a quantitative approach to community selection. So, on the quantitative side, you're looking at the types of communities that would benefit most from these types of things and be amenable to cultivating it or incubating it. So you're looking for communities that they're going to be in certain size categories. Your downtown LA is not a good place to rip up streets and sort that stuff out, and certainly they have a lot, and certainly they have a lot of, existing infrastructure, competition, red tape or whatever. So you're looking for a certain size, you're looking at things like road density, you're looking at things like brain drain. How many of your young people are leaving that community for other opportunities in neighboring communities or other metro areas? What kind of institutions do you currently have? What type of, all kinds of different stuff that we take a look at. And then on the qualitative approach, you're looking at things like political will. You're looking at, current, regulatory or legal structures or things that are going to be easier to navigate or work with. The cities that are pushing out RFPs for digital divide problems, or they're looking for fiber plant, or they've got a lot of dark fiber and they're asking, what do we do with this? We built this stuff in the 90s and the 2000s and we own it, but like, what do we do with it? Like, how do we use it? Those are the types of evaluative lenses that we usually take on that. And then things like sister communities, access to regional data centers. There's a thousand things we look at for that. And then, yeah,
Oh,
of
no,
course.
please.
No, I just, we're also trying to find the folks that are either underserved or will be able to benefit the most. Because ultimately, we're trying to find a way to make that community vibrant. A lot of these communities are in situations where they have massive FOMO of sister communities, or kind of enclaves of urban enclaves that are sapping a majority of their talent or investment capability or any of these other types of things. So these communities are the ones that can't compete. Then you get more homogenized outcomes across communities in the United States. So things like work from home, we have a massive amount of folks that need to be reskilled. And just because you were born in a certain place shouldn't vastly disadvantage you into certain opportunities just because you can't connect to a global economy. These little communities are smaller communities. I'm not talking rural kind of considerations, but folks in the 200,000, 2 million kind of territory, or whatever it is. Why shouldn't they be able to compete at a regional level, at least near a national level? So we're looking for communities that are really ripe for that and can really grow and be vibrant, so that they can take advantage of that. You shouldn't have to have all your kids leave, because they can't get work, or they can't find good opportunities, or they can't, build strong careers for being at home. Those types of things.
I think it's an easy sell. I think if I was the head of a community and you gave me that pitch, I'll be like, well, where do I sign, Coty?
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And just I'm again just curious here. When you start engaging with communities, I'm sure the development, the roadmap goes in different phases. So like, what is the life cycle timeline of phase 1 or phase 2, phase 3? And I guess, and tying it back into your current live case studies right now, like how far in the roadmap are they, or what phase would they be in?
Yeah, so to kind of draw a timeline of this, the first thing is responding to a community. Often, again, they have an RFP process or something like that. They've shown a will or an intention to do something, and that's a really strong partnership. Now, they don't fund the network that we build, but they are a strong partner in rallying the community, or navigating permits and like all these other types of things. So we need to make sure that the community is willing to accept us. They won't reject it as an organism, right? And then you have to take a look at some of the legal stuff, like pole attachment agreements are a big one. You will often spend back and forth on pole attachment agreements for months and months, sometimes years, with certain communities. And that's really just saying that you have legal access to utility poles. A lot of the plant itself, when I say plant, it's the stuff you build into the ground, needs to have that legal access to the poles. It's an aerial kind of build. Other parts are underground, and then you need a whole nother level of permitting, access, permission, et cetera. Everything needs permits, but certain communities are going to be able to work with you versus drag their feet on stuff. So at that level, one of the communities, our main community, we actually went out and we LiDAR'd the whole community, which is kind of cool. You have a car and it's slamming a laser. It literally slam. It's an acronym. That's what it's doing. And you've seen these Google cars and other, all these self-driving things. They're basically throwing this light around, and then as matter is bouncing off of it, it's collecting that and building a 3D model out of points of light, called a point cloud. So that allows us to understand a little bit about the city, its current infrastructure. You can have this at such a resolution that you understand where every single pole is at in the community, where every curb is at, every manhole, every little thing. And you can use it to start determining, like, if you were going to building a model, this is what that might cost, or whatever. That goes into what's called a high level design, and think of it kind of as an architectural blueprint of broadly, loosely how this is going to come out. And then you start taking more granular steps and getting more and more information through that process until you can get into a detailed design. Detailed design is when I know your house here gets gets this length of cable to this thing, and then it goes up to that. Like, it's incredibly detailed, right? We know this is not a vacant house. Someone, this is this type of building. Like, we have every kind of bit of information mostly sorted out. So the time between a detailed design and a pole attachment agreement can be 2 years through sometimes, depending on what you need to walk into. So that's why you kind of line up these communities in sequence as a parallel task. You've got a lot of exploration, discovery, and you've got them in rails, as you're doing kind of the brunt of the front end of work. And then actually the tactics of it are procuring a lot of materials. The supply chains are still very wonky. We have a great partner with Corning right now, and we've been able to get some good fiber. We have enough in our first community to build out the whole thing. That's not the case for a lot of folks that are now entering this situation. So then you just start getting people to sign up. Yeah,
That's amazing. How many like feet, yards, miles of fiber does a typical community you would need for that?
Thousands and thousands, thousands and
That's
thousands, like
unreal.
miles and miles of it. And you're typically building in phases. So you're going to have a construction footprint that is a certain amount of capital and other types of things attached to it. So each new phase you have kind of expands the community a little bit more. So you're always kind of building off of it and delivering new capability and capacity with those growths. So those phase expansions.
I think this is really, really cool. I think everyone aspires to work at a company with a strong mission. And I'm not to talk down on any SaaS companies or software companies out there, but aside from just making a simple app, I mean, you're building an OS, actual physical products, for example, the fiber, and then you can physically go to these communities and see the difference that your company's making, and it just makes it real, right? And I think that's awesome. Now let's switch gears for the final part here.
Yeah.
I'd just love to kind of talk more about your team. So how big is the company right now?
What I always do is get into Slack and see how many people in here. 37 is the current count. So it's it's a small company. It's not as small as every company. It's certainly not as big as most companies. So we're still quite in that founding situation, but we're also capitalized and we have ambitions, and we've built a lot of stuff that kind of puts us in a different class as well. So, with this kind of current moment, we're growing pretty quickly, and there's all the things that come with that. So what's some extra stuff that you want to know kind of around the team broadly, though?
What about working at Underline would you say is different? What's the X factor? If someone's listening to this, like, wow, I resonate a lot with Coty. I resonate with the mission, would love maybe one day to be part of this company. What could they look forward to? Yeah,
I think, again, folks that have generalized interests are going to do really strongly in this type of environment. So when a product designer is coming in, I like to know that they have an interest in science and other types of things, because now they're making products that have to deal with the nanometers of light. They have to make things for literal hardware. So I'm not necessarily looking for folks that have the background on that, but that they're genuinely interested in it. So I think the opportunity for a lot of us is we come from very, very different backgrounds, a very multidisciplinary team, and certainly product and design and other has a lot of surface area on all kinds of things that are happening. Since I was there at the beginning of the company, you have a stronger hand with design's impact in an org that a lot of folks don't have. They bring these, design and product later stages of a company, and so then you're kind of you've never had really a seat in building the vision of what actually goes on. So it's a nice size for the company. There's a lot of really gifted people that have done amazing things across the company in all kinds of different scenarios and in different companies and everything. And then ultimately we were work from home. We're a distributed team from day one. We built this whole company inside of the pandemic. We just had a retreat for the first time. There's people I've worked with day in and day out for years. I've never met them in person. I just did. So that's fantastic. And then there are people that I've worked with for years at this company and then even in past companies. And that thread has come right through. We've been able to work really, really efficiently and in familiar ways. It's a nice environment. It's not a grueling environment. Like, people generally want to see these substantial outcomes. They have a general curiosity of all these different spheres of domains that we have to touch. So if you're a type of person that really enjoys that and really consuming it and learning new things and seeing where connectivity is such a broad concept, like it touches everything. There's something there for everyone, right? And just seeing where all these nuts and bolts really translate to the future is really exciting.
In tech, when you're looking for a new job, it is part of just the dialogue that to help you determine whether a company that you are thinking about joining might fit your criterias or have the longest chance of success. There's a lot of things that you need to kind of look through. One of them is obviously the founder and their background. You clearly, I think, for your background, from what I've learned personally over the past maybe almost an hour now, it speaks for itself. But would you be able to maybe just share your personal opinion? What about you and your other co-founders as a collective unit with your collective skill set makes you unique to other founding teams out there, in case the audience is curious?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unique to the domain space. Telecommunications tends to be very geared towards a certain kind of worldviews or thought processes or experience sets. So us coming to this problem as a software and technology team is kind of unique. Again, this is more about physical plumbing in a traditional sense. And so having that software definition on top of that is quite a new concept for that. So, the folks that I'm working with have come from like Wall Street, and they've come from change.org, and they've come from political action, and they've come from construction and other bits, finance, medical, all over the place. These are folks that some of them have worked in telco for their entire life, 30 plus years, easily. Other people have come to this in very different perspectives on these problems that are still related to what we're doing. It's just that you usually don't have someone with that lens in the seat making a decision and driving it forward. So I'd say the diversity that I have in my colleagues is really, really interesting. And yeah, I'm one of the least credentialed people in the company. We've got some massive firepower of folks that have been in plenty of early stages all over the place. So done wonderful things, but they all care too. They're all mission aligned. So what else would be helpful in that? I can just drone on about,
just a couple more things. This has been fantastic. So for people on either coasts that are like, wow, I'm hoping maybe it would be really cool to see Underline technology, make it closer to me. Can you give us a little hint? I know you guys are starting in the Midwest, but surely in the future, part of the roadmap and evolution of the company is to expand somewhere in another direction, maybe possibly both. But can you give us a hint, maybe other areas you're thinking about?
So, our first community is in Colorado Springs, in Colorado, and our main data center there is Denver. But we are already looking at communities on both coasts, and then we're also looking at north and southern communities as well. Ultimately, what would behoove us the most is being able to have a bit of that intersection across the nation. Underline communities in different places means that we can have secure data between those two that don't even necessarily have to go over the internet as you think of it. You know, one of the fun things that you learn in Underline is that, you know, the internet is just one of many internets, if you will, or ways to connect with networking technology. BitTorrent, Tor, crypto, you know, either even internets that died before the internet was made. Like it's all just connections of people and stuff. So as we are looking at having these other places near, you know, certain regional data centers and communities, et cetera, that allows us to transmit interesting solutions across those lines. We're definitely looking at California community, definitely looking at an East Coast community, and a Southwest community. And then we've got dozens of other communities that are in various stages of conversation. So yeah, it's actually very fun when people go through we call it a leads flow, but there's a demand aggregation-y sort of layer to what we do. And anyone from anywhere in the United States can throw their address in and see where they can raise their hand and say, I'm interested in Underline coming. And just seeing all those little points of light is really, really fun. All the little heat maps and everything, you know. So
It's
yeah,
kind of like reminds me of the bidding for the next Olympic city in country. It's like
Yeah.
choose me.
yeah, exactly.
You guys have that power.
Yeah, it's a fun time.
So building a team right now in this climate, post-pandemic, middle of a
Yeah.
recession, middle of hyper competition for good talent, I think you can't sell you and your team short. I think scaling to a team of 37 is truly remarkable. So my question there is, what is the people who are listening, who are hiring managers, who are founders, who are growing teams, what is the key to success, or what was the key to success for you guys? And for looking forward into the future, I know that you're going to continue to grow, you're going to continue to hire more. If people in the audience are interested to apply one day, what sort of positions do you think you might be hiring for into the future, and where can people apply?
I'd say that it's really, really important that you have a founding team that is really, really close. You know, you need to make sure that they care about communication, that they're working towards the same outcomes, that they're all mission aligned, and that they're very good at communicating, and really just like, if you see the gap, you fill the gap and make sure that other people are in the know on it. You know, it's that kind of self-organizing organism that is really, really important to the core in those early days. And then as the organism grows, you're really trying to find people that can plug into this stuff and that, again, have those same shared traits. They're looking to communicate efficiently. They're looking to take on all kinds of unstructured jobs and figure out what just needs to be done, and simultaneously try to build towards that I call it a jazz sort of situation. I'm not the first to come up with this concept. You know, Max Dupree, kind of Herman Miller, old school kind of thought, like everyone has a structured narrative to the music that they have to play, but every moment is improvisational. And the real goal is, how can you have that improvisation while also maintaining the structure and keep those things going? So we're really, really keen on making sure that the folks that we hire are really built in this curious, mission aligned, communicative way, and the rest of it kind of solves itself. Like just diligent people that are like trying to move forward and do that in a sensible way. So I don't know if that's super but that's the key to success. It's making sure you're all running in the right direction and that the gaps are being filled.
It's perfect. And then I guess, what are some of the positions you might hire for in the future, and where can people apply if they're interested?
Yeah, I mean, product management stuff is coming up here. There's some design, positions that I'm certainly trying to fill. A lot of just network engineering stuff, a lot of software engineering stuff on front end, back end, full stack sort of territory. We've got, folks in the customer support. We do we take on a lot of the customer support that comes through our doors. So, folks in market, and folks out of market, marketing people, a lot of folks that specifically have experience working on the ground and working with communities and kind of building campaigns and other types of things in that type of fashion. So we find folks from, political backgrounds or community activism or, those types of things. They tend to be folks that are good at navigating new communities and trying to find ways to build coalitions. So that's really, really beneficial. So it's everything. Yeah, we're probably gonna double here in the next year or so. So I mean, there's plenty of stuff. And for folks that want to see the team right now, they can go to underline.com and go to our about page. You can see where all of our fun faces on there and even all the points of light and where we live. It's all scattered around the United States. And at the bottom of there, you can see any of the open positions or, go off script. There's also a little area that if you just want to submit whatever for a position that we're not currently like broadcasting, there's an open door for those folks as well. So
what else about future users of Underline? Is it also underline.com to sign up? And what does that flow look like? I'm sure it's pretty straightforward.
For the folks that are looking to get access, it's underline.com, and then each individual community is going to have their own microsite area. But if you show up at the front page, you can choose the community that you want. And then honestly, anyone that goes to any of those community pages and clicks the I'm interested, it'll put you in the national kind of interest side of stuff. So it's always nice. We ask surveys at the end of this, and people give us all these interesting things in there about their current experience with providers. And boy, it's a spicy, fun read all the time. So
I'm sure. And then I guess for anyone who wants to maybe reach out to you directly with any questions or advice, where can they find you?
Yeah, certainly on LinkedIn, they can look me up, or Twitter or whatever, or if they just want to throw general correspondence on the front page, underline.com, we've got a contact form in there, and just mention me. I'm not extremely online, but I'm very online, I suppose. So yeah, and I have a weird spelling of my name, Coty. So that usually helps with the SEO, right?
Exactly. One last question. So one of our favorite ways to end the podcast, Coty, is just to ask you if people want to follow in your footsteps one day to have a successful career, whether it's a tactical IC in design or maybe become a founder one day, what is one big advice that you would like to share with the community?
I think it's for me, it's always make time to play, and play is going to be defined in different ways. But I'm really, really bullish about being able to have little sandboxes and projects and things that stoke your interest and things that round out your knowledge about certain things. They pay dividends. And so when you can play around with little concepts, new technologies or whatever, you can then often translate that into other things. And when you come into those opportunities, have a familiarity to the landscape. You may not be an expert or have a super deep level of that, but at least a bit of the boundaries and the edges of that stuff. And so you may then be able to see, different options than you would normally have, or be able to, take advantage of stuff that you would not normally have the vision for. So I think just play. It's really important. Set the time for it, set the budget for it, find ways to explore and really cherish and invest in that exploration.
I love that so much. But Coty, thank you so much again for having a couple minutes to chat about your background. And I really enjoyed it. I found it really inspirational, insightful. And thank you for also just being honest and transparent and sharing with fun stories from bubble bars to steel earrings back in the day, and sharing how you were just able to do an amazing job navigating career, figuring out really intriguing business problems that you and your past team solving. And of course, what you and your Underline team are doing now is really exciting. And I'm sure a lot of people who have listened to this and they're not in Colorado, I'm sure like me, they're hoping one day to see Underline community or drive through one perhaps one of these days. But It's really exciting to see what the company has done so far in this really shaky kind of climate that we're in, and really excited to see what you and your team will do moving forward. And we will continue to root for you and be excited for every success that you and the team do in the future. So thank you so much again. We will certainly keep in touch, and we'll always think of you guys and as you continue to scale and have continued to have tremendous amount of impact in different communities around the country.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure sharing this passion with everyone. So yeah, thanks for the interest.
You're welcome, and we'll keep in touch. Coty, have a wonderful day.